Yo, welcome back everybody to a brand new video here on the second channel, and today we're going to talk about the changes that Pokemon have now made to the 2025 competitive circuit. Things have shifted quite a bit. Getting your World Championship invite is going to be a lot more different and potentially a lot more harder now, and I definitely wanted to talk about the changes that have now been made to the 2025 circuit and what it means for the competitive game. Talk about some of the pros and cons. I mean, as somebody who didn't go for the World's invite this last year, but still ended up competing at quite a few tournaments, I wanted to give my opinion on all of that stuff in today's video here on the second channel. I'll leave a link to Pokemon down below if you want to go check out the changes for yourself. But yeah, we're going to talk about all of it in today's video. And if you're new to the second channel, make sure to subscribe down below. We're on the road to 15K subs. And if you want to enjoy the video, leave a like. Let me know what you think of these changes in the comments below. I'm actually very interested to hear what everyone thinks of all the changes made to the circuit. So yes, they have announced that they are changing the circuit. And this was actually been rumored now for a couple of weeks now within Twitter. And it ended up being true. And from what I heard, too, the changes that were being made actually ended up being a reality. So let's get into it here. So the World Championship qualification update has been changed, and these changes are pretty big here for the TCG. Now, in order to qualify for your World Championship invite, you no longer need to get a certain amount of CP. So in the past, this past season, to get your World Championship invite for the World Championship 2024, you needed, at the very minimum, 600 CP. Now, whether you got that through winning a regional on the spot, getting your automatic invite, or competing at a ton of tournaments, or doing a bunch of League Cups and challenges alongside the tournaments, you had to at least somehow get 600 CP to qualify for the World Championship invite. And it's always been the CP threshold for a long time now, but now they have changed it to basically a ranking system. So in order to get your World Championship invite, you have to be in a certain number of the rank here. So in order to get your invite for somebody who lives in the US and Canada, which is where I happen to live, you need to at least be in the top 125 masters. Now, that is a pretty significant change. That automatically makes it not just harder to get your invite, but it also means that there's going to be less people that are actually going to be getting their invite. And that is a very big deal. You have to finish in the top 125 players in order to get the invite, meaning that you essentially have to be as competitive as you can be throughout the entire season. With 600 CP, a lot of the time what can happen is let's say you're able to get your invite early on in the season, or you get very close to your invite and you don't need to do that much more to get it. A lot of the time you can actually play it cool and not go to as many tournaments near the end of the season, or you might be able to skip a couple of ICs or some regionals that you don't want to go to because you're already very close to your invite, or maybe you just already got your invite early enough where you don't need to go to that many more tournaments, so you can kind of chill out for the remainder of the season if you don't feel like competing again. But now that it's basically you have to be in the top 125, you actually have to be competing a fair amount this season in order to get your invite, and that is a very big deal. Now, of course, it is both US and Canada. I did a video on the Shovel Squad where we actually talked about the rumor that this was actually supposed to be, the rumor was there was going to be a ranking, like top X amount of players were going to get their invite. And I did say that the US and Canada probably would have to either be divided or can join together, because if they were to keep US and Canada separate, it would be a lot easier to get your invite in Canada, but a lot harder to get your invite in the US, because there's more players that play in the US than there is Canada. But they've actually combined the two together, and this is arguably going to be the hardest of getting your World's invite than it's ever been, because the US and Canada being combined is insane. Canada is already a very highly competitive region for competing within the TCG, and then of course the US is gigantic. There are so many people within the US that compete and play the TCG all across the country. It's going to make it very difficult for the invite to be achievable throughout the US and Canada. You basically have to be in the top level of players in order to get your invite, because I mean, if you look at the best of the best right now, they're probably all going to be fine. I'm talking about the people who either barely got their invite this year, or people who wanted to get their invite for this next season, who didn't get it this 2024 season, but now might be a little discouraged because it's going to be a lot more competitive and a lot more harder to get your invite. And that is obviously a very big deal. As we scroll down here, we can look at the other changes. They did update the best finish limit too, which was another big deal. They updated the best finish limit for the League Cups and Challenges. So best finish limit of 4 League Challenges and best finish limit of 4 Cups are now going to be applied to your invite, which is fine. I mean, I'm not a big fan of league challenges. I've won a few of them, but I just don't like them because basically a league challenges, you have to go 6-0 in order to win it, which, can be not very fun, or at least with a League Cup, you can afford to take a loss or two and still potentially make it into top cut if you're lucky. I would much rather prefer to go to League Cups over challenges, but yes, the league challenges and cups, best finish limits are still going to be at 4 each, and the CP was not changed with them. There is an argument to be made that they should lower the amount of CP you get from winning a League Cup, because 50 is actually a lot of points, but it is what it is. And then we scroll down here to the best finish limit for regionals. Now, a lot of people are confused right now as to whether or not there's a best finish limit for internationals, because currently there's a best finish limit of 6 for regionals and special events. However, it doesn't say there's anything for the international stuff, but there's also no divider between the two things. So we don't know actually if there's a best finish limit for internationals. If there is, that is a very big deal. And if there's not, it's also a pretty darn big deal, because internationals are going to be a very crucial part in actually getting your World Championship invite. As you can see, they've even increased the points here that you get at internationals. I mean, just finishing in the top 256 alone gets you 120 points, which is quite a bit. That was not how it used to be before, which is kind of insane. So upping the amount of points you get in an international, but also not giving you best finish limit at the internationals is definitely a very big deal, because this actually incentivizes players to go to all 3 international championships. And to be fair, not everybody has the luxury of doing that, because, you got to travel around the world. You got to go to Europe, you got to go to Latin America, and then, of course, you got to go to New Orleans, which is where NEIC is going to be hosted once again this next year. So it is a very big deal. So if you're somebody who is going to try to get their invite this year, I would highly recommend going to all 3 of the international championships because of how much points you can actually get at each international. And they've even upped the points, it looks like, for the regionals, it looks like here. Just getting top 32 or better. Like, top 32 gets you 125 points. That was not how it was before. So that's pretty cool that they've upped the amount of points you get. But yeah, best finish limit of 6, it's not a big deal. Internationals not having a best finish limit is kind of a big deal, and especially because it makes it so much more rewarding to actually go to the internationals to get your invite. And then, of course, here we do have the increased booster prizing. I mean, that's cool, I guess. It is nice to always get a booster box when you do well at a tournament, because when I got top 32 at the Knoxville Regional Championships this past year, not only did I gain $1,000, but I also got a free booster box of Paradox Rift. So that's pretty cool that they've upped the pricing for booster boxes. You actually get a booster box now, depending on the size of the regional, of course. If the tournament has at least 1,000 to 2,000 players, you, just for placing top 128, can get a booster box. And that's actually pretty dope. I like that. One of the main issues with the current structure for regional pricing is if you get top 64, I mean, you're not getting a whole lot out of it. You don't get any money, and you miss out on even getting a booster box, where if you get top 32, you get money and a booster box. But now if you actually get top 32, you actually get even more than a booster box. You're actually going to get 2 booster boxes, it looks like, which is really, really cool. So that is cool that they up the pricing for that kind of stuff. Then, of course, if you don't get top 128, you still get a booster box, which is honestly not terrible. Booster boxes tend to go for, $100+. So at the very least, you get a booster box you can keep open or sell, or, whatever the case may be, which is kind of cool. Even getting top 256 gets you at least 18 packs, which honestly isn't too bad at all, which is nice. And in all honesty, with how much harder it might be now to make day 2, which we're going to talk about in a minute, potentially just making day 2, at least you're going to get something out of it with these packs, potentially, depending on how big the day 2s end up becoming, which is a big deal. Now, the cash pricing was not adjusted, it looks like, which is fine. I mean, obviously, they should still keep it how it is. Actually, funny enough, when they first announced this, there was a typo on the page where they actually had they adjusted the pricing, which was obviously a big mistake on there, and they didn't mean to do that. The pricing is still going to be the same. If you win a regional, you get $10,000. If you get top 32, you get $1,000 at the very minimum. You don't get any pricing for top 64. There's a debate that maybe, at least you're getting a booster box, potentially getting top 64, but there is a debate where maybe you should get, a special promo card for getting top 64 or whatever the case may be. And some people even argue at least you should get $500 for making top 64 or whatever. But it is nice they didn't adjust the pricing, because this is one of the best parts about the changes from last season is the pricing was so much. The internationals, all the same too. $2,000 for getting top 64 is pretty crazy too. And then World Championships obviously staying the same also. Pretty dope stuff there, or at least you're getting a lot for top 4, $20,000. It's kind of crazy, just for making top 4, and then obviously $50K for winning the World Championships. Pretty cool stuff. All right, we can move on here to the there's travel prize updates. And then here's another big one here. This is arguably one of the more, in my opinion, the more controversial changes outside of the top X players. And that is actually going to be getting into day 2 now is going to be a lot more different than it was before. And as you can see, they actually adjusted the amount of points you need to actually make day 2. And this is honestly a very big deal. 1,025 to 2,048 players, there's only going to be 8 rounds of Swiss, because usually at a regional, there's 9 rounds of Swiss, and you at least need 19 match points to make day 2. So if you go 6-2-1, you make it into the second day of competition. Now it has been completely adjusted. So let's say, for example, the Knoxville Regional Championships this past year in the season was 1,400 players, I'm pretty sure. So if it was 1,400 players, there only would have been 8 rounds of Swiss, and in order to make day 2, you would have needed 18 match points, meaning that you have to go 6-2 to make it into day 2. And then, of course, the big update, and this might be the big one that actually impacts the most because of how big the regionals have actually been becoming now. There's a very good chance this is actually going to be the norm now for making day 2, because Knoxville was a bit of an anomaly for being a smaller tournament because it's a smaller venue, but these larger venues that Pokemon have, there's a very good chance this becomes the norm. So essentially, if there's 2,049 players to 40,000 players, which is probably what we're going to see, because a lot of the regionals that we had this past season were in that range of like 2,600 players, meaning that the threshold to make day 2 is now going to be 21 match points, meaning that you have to go 7-2 at the very minimum to make it into day 2, which is a very big deal. And there's also the 9 rounds of Swiss. Now, 7-2 at a regional isn't that bad, because if you make it to 6-2, if you make it to your winning in, you usually have the option to ID with your opponent to get that 19 match points, so you both players can get into day 2. But sometimes because of the upped pricing that was applied at regionals, when you're at that 6-2 record, your opponent can actually offer the ID, but then your opponent might say, no, I'm not going to take the ID, we're going to play it out, because I want to at least try to go 7-2 to have a better chance of making top cut, to have a better chance of making money. Now, you actually have to go 7-2 to at least make it into day 2, meaning that there is no more IDing. Basically, this means that you can't afford a tie in a tournament anymore, and that is a very big deal. One of the biggest complaints that I've been seeing over the past year or so within the Pokemon TCG was the concept of tying as a whole. The fact people can make it into day 2 at a 5-0 for a record was pretty ridiculous. But yeah, now to make it in day 2, you no longer can afford a tie, meaning that you actually have to play a lot faster. You have to have your opponent play a lot faster. This also probably affects what decks you end up bringing to an actual tournament. So, for example, if you were to play Gardevoir to a regional, there's a very good chance that you won't make day 2 if you end up tying a lot, because Gardevoir is a slow deck, and if you end up tying a bunch of games, you're not going to make it to that 21 match point threshold, and you're going to miss out on making day 2, and that is a very big deal. This honestly makes getting day 2 a lot harder, because, yeah, you have to go 7-2. You have to win that extra game. You can no longer just win 6 games and potentially make it into day 2. You now have to win 7 games to make it into day 2, which does make getting day 2 a whole lot harder now, because you also cannot tie as much or tie at all to make it in day 2. This is, in my opinion, one of the bigger changes that they've made to the system, and I'm definitely going to be interested to see how this impacts the outcome of the tournaments, because less people might start playing in these tournaments knowing that day 2 is a bit harder to get to now, and then also on the fact that getting the invite is going to be a lot harder. I wonder if this is going to cause actual tournaments to be less populated. Because like I said, this past season, we were seeing like 2,500 people at a regional, which was nuts. But also making day 2 wasn't as hard as it used to be because you only had to go 6-2-1, and with the size of the tournaments, there was more, newer average players playing, meaning that the tournaments could have been a little bit easier to make it into day 2. But now they have to go 7-2. It's obviously going to be a lot harder to get into day 2, and this actually could impact how many people now sign up for a regional. We might actually start seeing more regionals become smaller now. Maybe we're going to start hitting that threshold of only 2,000 players in a tournament with that 8 rounds of Swiss day 1 with that 18 match point threshold, as opposed to the 21 match point threshold that we would have if we were still getting these 2,500 player tournaments. I'm sure the ICs will probably be well and above the threshold for the 21 match points, but there's a good chance that a lot of the regionals might end up only being at that 18 match threshold due to how much harder now it might be to make day 2 and how much harder it'll be to get your invite. So I'm curious to see how that's actually going to impact the outcome of it. I don't mind that, though, because it just means that, like, decks that tend to tie more often are not going to be as popular. So, for example, Snorlax might not be as popular anymore because you can't really afford to tie to make it to day 2 now, so that's going to discourage players from wanting to play a deck like Snorlax to a tournament because you can't afford those ties anymore, and that's a big deal, and that is both a positive and a negative. I am fine with how it is to get day 2. The 19 match point threshold isn't a bad thing in my opinion, but if this does cause players to have to play quicker and less ties to happen, that's a good deal. Because whenever I try to play in a regional, I try to avoid tying as much as I can. I think for the most part, I've been able to tie at least, I think out of all my day 2s, I've usually only had like 1 tie getting into day 2. So yeah, I try to avoid tying as much as I can when trying to make it to day 2 at a regional, and now you have to definitely not tie when you're trying to get it into day 2. And if you have an opponent who is playing very slowly, telling them to pick up the pace of play or calling a judge on them for potential slow play might have to be more of a normal thing now because, like I said, players can't afford to tie as often anymore. That's a very big deal. They did announce some of the places for the tournaments. Of course, the first one we're going to get is Baltimore Regionals, which is going to be in Baltimore, obviously at the Baltimore Convention Center, which we did have this in 2022. It's going to be on the 13th of September, which is going to be the first regionals, obviously, after the World Championships. And this is, a couple months away now. And, of course, we do have one in Brazil, one in Germany, Peru. We have one in Louisville, Kentucky. So that's a new one. I don't think we've had Louisville yet, or at least we haven't had Louisville in a while. That's going to be on the 11th of October. We have Lille, Gdansk is returning. Sacramento's returning too, it looks like, on the 22nd of November. Then, of course, we have Stuttgart returning. Columbia, I think, is also returning there. And then, obviously, Toronto is going to be returning. It doesn't look like it's going to be at the Enercare Center anymore. The Metro Toronto Convention Center is going to be on the 13th of December. Toronto Regionals have always been in December, I think. So, I mean, I'm not really surprised to see it in December again. So, yeah, that's going to be pretty cool to see, for sure. And then, of course, we have the International Championship thing. There's one thing I did want to mention with these. So they're going to be in the same locations. We got Sao Paulo, we have London, and then, of course, we have New Orleans, which will be returning. Latin America International Championship is going to be on the 15th and 17th of November. This is probably going to be the set that's coming out after Stellar Miracle. That we're going to be getting in September. So that's going to be the set that's going to be legal for that, kind of like how Paradox Rift was legal for LEIC last year. And then the big one, of course, is EUIC. Now, EUIC is going to be on the 21st and 23rd of February, meaning that there's a good chance we have a February rotation. Keep in mind, EUIC has always lined up with rotation for the past few years, meaning that, yeah, EUIC might actually be in the rotation format. So that means we won't have to wait until March again for rotation. Thankfully, the November set won't be super long, as it might rotation might just happen at the beginning of February to line up with EUIC 2 weeks later. That's a pretty big deal that I did want to mention real quick. And then obviously NEIC is going to be on the 13th and 15th of June. So cool stuff, cool stuff. But yeah, let me know what you think of these changes down below. Some things I wanted to mention, definitely, obviously, the taking away the tie thing, I think is both a good thing and could be a bad thing because this might discourage players from wanting to play. Now, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't go to tournaments. I'm not saying that just because it's harder now to get your invite and it's harder now to make it to day 2 at a regional championships, it doesn't mean you should stop going to these tournaments. Basically, there's still things you want to do to go to these tournaments. Just because you can't get your invite doesn't mean you still can't compete, because it's a reward to make it into day two, right? The cash prizing, like even if you don't get your invite, but if you at least have a couple of top 32 finishes throughout the season, you're still making money. Like that should still be one of your goals for going to a tournament. Isn't obviously to play for fun, obviously should be a very big deal. And just wanting to hang out with friends and stuff is always going to be a main factor. But part of the goal for the competitive drive should also just be to try to make money when you go to these tournaments. If you're somebody who knows that they reasonably won't be able to get their invite because they can't go to every single IC or every regional that they want to go to, so getting into that top X at the end of the season is going to be really difficult for them. Honestly, going to a tournament should still be something you should look to do because at least you can still try to compete for cash prizing. That's still obviously a big deal, and it's still an accomplishment to even get these top 32 finishes, top 64 finishes, because obviously you do get a place on your Limitless page, and you do get money, and it's still not a bad thing because, I mean, getting money is still a good reward. Even if you're not going for your invite, you should still be competing to try to earn some cash because the prizing is still pretty darn good, especially at the internationals. If you're somebody who wants to go to all the international championships but doesn't know if they're going to be able to compete for their actual invite, even though if you do go to all three internationals, it's easier to get your invite. Basically, you should still want to play in these tournaments because getting a good placement still means you're going to get money regardless. And even if you're somebody who isn't trying to get their invite, competing for money is still a pretty good reward in my opinion, and still a good incentive to actually do well at these tournaments and actually go to these tournaments to compete for money and pride. And obviously, for the fun of the game is a very big deal too. So yeah, these changes are definitely very interesting. It is going to be a lot harder to get the invite, especially for somebody like me who lives in Canada. Having to have a placement of top 125 or better in both US and Canada is going to be pretty difficult, I'm not going to lie. Canada, like I said, is already a very heavily competitive region, and the US is also a very populated and very competitive region. So getting your invite in North America is going to be really difficult, and that's something that I'm potentially not looking forward to. I was maybe going to go for my invite this year a little bit harder because I didn't go for my invite this past season. But obviously getting the invite is going to be difficult in North America due to the density of both US and Canada and how competitive both regions are. So definitely going to be a little bit more difficult to get the invite this time around for people in the US and Canada. It's going to be very slim margins for sure. And there's a good chance that you might miss your invite by only a couple of points because there's so many people trying to get the invite in both US and Canada combined. So definitely a very big deal there. But let me know what you think of this all down below. What do you think of the best finish limit update? What do you think of the top X players needing to get their invite? And what do you think of the new day two point reward structure? Because I definitely think that the day two one might be one of the bigger things that I don't see as many people talking about on Twitter right now. But yeah, let me know what you think of it down below. If you're new to the channel, make sure to subscribe down below. Having the road to reaching 15K subs, and I'll catch you on another video here. Bye-bye.